Believe it or not, the video you're about to watch isn't one I intentionally set out to make. It was originally intended to be a review of Dutch developer Vlambeer's Super Crate Box for the Nintendo Switch. I had a whole angle worked out for it and everything. But then I started doing my research, and that's always dangerous, because that's when I start to learn all kinds of fascinating things I didn't know before, or find things I didn't know even existed. Then, before you know it, I've gone down the rabbit hole. In this case, digging for dirt on Vlambeer's game led me down an interesting path, when I discovered that it had been given the 8-bit demake treatment for the Commodore 64, courtesy of Ace homebrew programmer Paul Koller. Cheekily, this version of it's been retitled Super Breadbox, alluding to the common nickname for Commodore's famous 8-bit micro. And seeing as it was quite easy to find and legitimately acquire online, I figured it was worth a spin. Using the term demake to describe Super Breadbox actually feels a bit misleading to me, because if you have any experience of Vlambeer's game, you'll know that it's a pretty lo-fi affair in its own right. And you only have to play Paul Koller's C64 version for a little while to see that it really feels like a straight conversion of it, albeit with a few less frills here and there. Obviously, by its nature, it lifts all of its gameplay mechanics from the original, so maybe Koller can't take too much credit for that. But he deserves full praise for turning in an extremely faithful conversion, which not only expands on Super Crate Box, but also imbues it with a little of that unmistakable 8-bit home micro flavour. The game plays on a single screen, where you're set with the task of collecting crates as you fend off attacking enemies. Those enemies come in 3 varieties: small, huge and floaty, and continuously spawn from the top of the screen. At the base of each level is a fire pit, and if enemies reach it, they'll become angry, and then continue to charge about the screen at greater speed. You don't want that, because in Super Breadbox, one collision with the enemy kills you outright, ending your game. And enemies are plentiful, so the pressure's on to get them before they get you. You're armed, of course, but killing enemies does nothing to increase your score. Rather, the number of crates you pick up in each run accounts for that. But the twist is that each crate you pick up swaps out your current weapon for a new one, and this is where things get interesting. Each weapon has its own distinct characteristics, necessitating a different approach from the player to get the best from them. A few of them are fairly rubbish in use as well, although which ones are best and worst is likely going to come down to the preference of the individual player. The more crates you collect over repeated runs at the game, the more content you'll unlock, from extra stages and playable characters to those all-important weapons. And after a while, the game offers you such a wide arsenal of different assorted bombs, boomsticks and bashing implements that you'll find yourself changing up tactics constantly. Because you need to be picking up crates continually, thus chopping and changing between the range of unlocked weapons, you're not given the luxury of finding one you're comfortable with and sticking with it. The weapon you're assigned with each new pickup is also randomised, so you really have to think on your feet as you play. Get a weapon you're not comfortable with, and your best bet is probably to scramble for the next crate in hopes of getting something better. And when you get hold of a nice reliable machine gun or flamethrower, you may want to spend some time thinning out the enemy herd to make your life a little easier. Little being the operative word though, because Super Breadbox is a very challenging game. The enemies pouring into the screen really are relentless, and the quirks of all the different weapons mean that playing the game isn't as simple a proposition as shooting some enemies while avoiding others. While some weapons are simple point and shoot affairs, others feature differing degrees of kickback, something to watch out for when you're surrounded by enemies or standing near a platform's edge. Some, like the laser pistol or proximity mines, require a keen sense of timing to use. My favourite though is the disc gun, which fires a projectile that rebounds when it hits a wall and could very well end up killing you if you're not quick enough about jumping out of its path. Great if you're going for the Darwin Award. This game requires a high level of awareness and focus, and that's really the genius of it. On screen, it may look like it's just a simple platform shooter, but there are so many factors for the player to consider at any one moment that it's constantly engaging. The thing is, everything I've mentioned about how it plays is true across all its different iterations. It's the kind of thing that ought to translate well to any platform. But on the Commodore 64, it's an absolutely incredible achievement. And here's a shocker, after playing the other versions of it, I actually think Super Breadbox may be my favourite. Inevitably, it's missing a few features of the game that inspired it. The additional game modes and fancier visual effects of Vlambeer's original are absent, but it comes as a pleasant surprise to find that it has double the number of unlockable stages. That's kind of a big deal, as Super Cratebox only featured 3, and supplementing those with some Commodore exclusive ones makes this port feel much more substantial. There are a few things I noticed about the gameplay that feel a bit different as well. Perhaps the most noticeable deviation being that, in keeping with the way most 8-bit home micro games used to work, you jump by pressing up on your joystick. That's one of those tweaks that I suspect people will either love or hate, but from where I stand, it makes the game feel a bit more authentic to the C64. It took me a little while to get used to, but playing with a trusty Competition Pro joystick, it soon came to feel pretty natural. I've played enough of the different versions of the original to notice that jumping does feel a bit different. There's a clever trick in all versions of the game whereby you jump higher depending on how long you depress the jump button, and that carries over to Koller's D-Make. But I've noticed that where Super Cratebox requires a certain amount of precision to make certain jumps, it's a bit more forgiving here. This isn't necessarily a complaint though, more of an observation, and it's details like this that give Super Breadbox its own sense of character. Super Breadbox has that rare quality about it that I love in video games. It's easy to pick up and play, but challenging enough that it takes real skill to play well. Even when I think I'm getting good at it, it takes delight in handing me my own backside. But it's not a game I ever feel frustrated with. More to the point, I find myself laughing and smiling at it whenever I play it. And that's not something a huge number of video games, be they new, old, demade, decaffeinated, discombobulated, or whatever, manage to do. There's just so much to love about it, from its frantic pace, which ensures that games can last for as little as a few seconds if you're not careful, to the simple but awesome touch of the screen shaking in response to heavy impacts and gunfire. This was always a great, lively game concept to begin with, but played on a Commodore 64, it delivers a gigantic hit of pure, unadulterated, hard to put down fun, with a lovely sheen of retro charm applied to it for good measure. I'd absolutely recommend giving it a play.